or talking to people. That's included in that, but that's also living our lives, influencing people around us, being kingdom bringers, being people who actually change the world. Do you think that the world today, why is the world today different than 2,000 years ago?
We've allowed it.
2,000 years ago.
Revelation.
Not 6,000 years ago. I'm going to propose to you a world's a better place today than it was when Yeshua walked the earth.
Yeah.
Because I've studied Roman history. It was a brutal place back then. Sure, there's still stuff going on today, but people identify evil as evil for the most part. Now we're getting away from that. But people identify evil as evil. Back then, if you were a Roman citizen, you had a slave and they made you mad, oh, let's crucify him. Is anybody going to say anything? No, that's your right. He's your slave. He's not really human. He's just your property. So whatever you do with your property, that's okay. Or we've got exposure, where if a woman gave birth, she would bring the infant to her husband's feet and lay it there. And if he picked it up, he accepted it as his own. If he didn't, he rejected the child, and they would take it and throw it outside. And that is called exposing it to the elements. Either it would die from the elements, or dogs would eat it, or a slave trader might come and pick it up. Because it's not really human. That's the world that they lived in. No one thought anything was wrong with that. That was just life as it was. If we really want to see what the world was back then, go to North Korea. Have you ever been there? I hear the vacation companies they won't even take you there anymore, right? But even in North Korea, at least there's people saying evil is what North Korea is. Back then, that wasn't even evil. No one even identified that as evil. There's no one standing up for those people. The Jews didn't care. They cared about themselves. They wouldn't do that to themselves, but they weren't overly concerned about everyone else. They've been so beaten down by the outsiders, the Seleucid Empire, the Maccabees and everything like that. They've turned their focus entirely internal. They were just worried about themselves. And so what Yeshua does there, we see over the past 2,000 years has changed the world in ways that we don't even start. I mean, even as much as I've studied, I don't think I appreciate it enough how profoundly different the world is. I'm going to propose to you, it's because what he did that day on the tree. And what God did 2 to 3 days later. It says on the third day, and it also says after 3 days. So that's the whole argument there. And like I said, doesn't really matter how many days, what day of the week. What matters is what? That he was raised from the dead. Because no one had ever been raised from the dead. Can you imagine how shocking that was? Someone going around saying, hey, someone died. And not just that they died the most shameful death imaginable. And you realize in an honor and shame culture, the way that you die is extremely important. Extremely important. How many of you ever studied honor and shame? Awesome, quite a few of you. Honor and shame cultures, this is the way that the world has been for thousands of years. It's really only in the industrialized Western society that we've been able to shift to an individual culture. Because we no longer have to depend on people. If you guys don't like me, I'll just go down the road to another church. If you guys don't want to sell to me, I'm just going to go down to the other Walmart down the road. We don't have to depend on relationships to get along or to get by in life. We can just move down somewhere else. We become completely independent. Back then, if someone pulled a Matthew 18 on you and cast you out of the community, made you like a tax collector and a Gentile, that was huge. You probably may not even be able to survive. No one's going to do business with you in that community. It's very, very important. And for them, the way that you die determines where you go. Let me ask you a question. Yeshua said, those who seek to what? Save their lives will lose it. Because if you seek to save your life, that's a shameful action. But those who are willing to die for the sake of the kingdom will inherit eternal life. The way that you die mattered to them back then. It matters to people today in honor and shame cultures. Look at the Muslims. Why are they willing every top Ramadan to go out and blow up themselves, kill 1,500 people to celebrate their God? Why are they willing to blow themselves up? Because if they die that honorable death by killing an infidel, they get to go to their paradise. They get their 72 virgin goats. And that's what they want. That's what they desire. If you blow yourself up, that's what you get. But, and I use this example all the time, but it's so powerful, but you give a woman a rifle, and you send her after them, and they run like little scared goats. Why? Because being killed by a woman is shameful. You don't get to go to your paradise if you die a shameful death. Crucifixion was a shameful death. You don't get to go to whatever paradise it is. That's why they used it. One of the main reasons was the shame of it. It put you in a place where you didn't get to go to your Elysium or whatever for the Greeks. So Yeshua didn't just die any death. He died the most shameful death. And so the idea of someone dying this death that should have sent them straight to where, he comes back from the dead. That's huge. We don't understand how powerful that is. Because we live in a culture that has a lot of ideas about afterlife, whether we're going to heaven or being resurrected. We have these ideas of afterlife. They didn't exist back then. What you have on this earth was all that counted. Now, if that's the case, if all that happens on this earth is the only thing that counts, how do you control a person? How do you control people? Life or death? If you control death, you control the people. You mess with me, I put you to death. You mess with Caesar, you're put to death. So as Paul writes in Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14, I believe it is. He says, "Therefore, since children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook in the same, that through death he might render powerless him who had the power of death, that is the devil, and might free those whom through fear of death were subject to slavery their entire lives."
Where are you?
Hebrews 2, verse 14 through 15. That's powerful. That's what Yeshua did on the cross. And I realize there's a lot of different aspects to it, but this is one of the more powerful aspects, especially for those people back then, that we tend to forget because we live in a culture that has been so raised up with the idea of either going to heaven or bodily resurrection that we kind of take this stuff for granted. But back then, that was power. The Sadducees were the group who did not believe in the resurrection. Who were the Sadducees? Were they just like the Baptists or the Pentecostals, the Lutherans or whatever? Were they just another denomination? They controlled the priesthood, the Sanhedrin. They were the powerhouse. They were the elite in Judea at the time. Now, does that make a little bit more sense why they did not believe in the resurrection? Because the resurrection is not just a nice, fancy religious message. It's a political message. If there's a resurrection of the dead, what does that mean? That means that the Sadducees don't run the world. That means that Satan does not run the world. Why? Because it doesn't matter what they do to you, our God is more powerful. And if our God can raise us up from the dead, who cares what they do? That shifted the power. That's why he talks about in John, he says, now, there it is. It just says it short. Now the ruler of this world will be driven out. How is he driven out? Satan's still around. He's still influencing, but he's lost power. And he's being driven out. Why? Because as soon as you show people that our God is more powerful, that our God has the power to bring people back from the dead, now they don't need to worry about what he does. That's so important for us to realize. I fear it's really being lost in our culture today. I work in a neurological intensive care unit, and it's sad because we have people who are very religious, and their loved one, I mean, they're 90 years old, they're now brain dead, and they still keep them on life support for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks because they feel like if they say take them off, it's going to kill them. They feel like they're responsible, and they feel like ultimately death is the end. But for us who believe death is not the end,
Yeah.
death is just the way to get to eternal life, right? That should change us to the very core. When we don't worry about what happens to us, we worry about what God wants us to do for Him. We don't worry if they laugh at us. We stand up for what's right.
Amen.
We work to change the world to be a better place. It starts in our lives, in our houses, in our marriages, in our congregations, our communities, our workplaces. We can change the world by changing us, changing the way that we act, showing people the light. All right. We saw that. I want to go in and I want to look at a little bit of the horrors of crucifixion here. Maybe. I think I gotta get closer. There we go. All right. It just wanted me to be closer. Personal relationship. Okay. We see the stretching of the hands. Anyways. All right. There we go. Okay. Roman crucifixions. If you guys really want to know about Roman crucifixions, Josephus is a great place to start, but Josephus' book is about that thick. And it's little bitty, yeah, very little bitty prints.
Yes.
I will admit to you, I've not read all of Josephus, but it would be good if we all could. But if you don't, there's a really good book by Martin Hengel. It's like 90 pages, and it's larger print. 90 pages. And he goes through and he talks about all of these different things with crucifixion, and looking at them from Josephus and from Seneca and from all these writers. And it's really important just to see how horrific crucifixion was. It actually got to the point where it was actually a way, you know, if we today we say go blank yourself, if we're not being very nice, they would say go hang yourself, using that word crucifix. It wasn't, there weren't a bunch of Romans walking around with little crosses on their shirts going, hey, I'm Roman. That would be like hanging like aborted baby parts on your necklace. That's the horror that they thought of with crucifixion. We can go through all these. By the way, does anybody know that Yeshua was not the first one crucified?
Yes.
Okay, we're on point there. Does everybody know that Yeshua was not the first person declared Messiah?
Yes. Nor the last.
Nor the last, by any means. You see, Judea had a long history of Messiahs. They still have that. But especially for them, we've got to understand, what did it mean when someone declared themselves Messiah for a Jew in the first century? That meant probably some of your friends are going to be hanged. Because they had people declared Messiah. They would rise up, and what does every Messiah do? Rise up against the Romans. Fight the Romans, because that's what they wanted. They wanted to be freed from the Romans. That's what they thought God's kingdom was crushing the Romans with violence. And so people like Judas the Galilean rose up against them. He even took over a whole town. And what ends up happening? He gets defeated. 2,000 of his followers get crucified all around Jerusalem. But that wasn't even the first. Because, and this is the important thing we've got to understand, they were looking for defeating the Romans through violence, through force. That had happened already. The Maccabees, 160s, right? The Maccabees, we every Hanukkah, we love this story, right? They raise up against these evil people, these people they had told them they can't keep the Torah, they can't circumcise their children, they defiled the temple, they did all these terrible things, and the Maccabees, they beat them, they got them, they destroyed them. They were the messiahs of their day. What good did that do them? See, that was kingdom in the human way of doing kingdom. Kingdom through force, kingdom through violence. Because we fast forward in history to a little guy by the name of Alexander Janus, who was of the line of the Maccabees. He was one of the Hasmoneans. And this guy, he caused a little trouble. And he was a Sadducee. This is where these two parties start to form. And there's a huge civil war between the Sadducees, who were the elite, who really controlled the temple and the politics, and the Pharisees. The Pharisees were a big party of the resurrection, because the resurrection overcomes the political power of the Sadducees. And so there's a huge civil war, and after a lot of fighting, the Pharisees switched sides, because they had brought these outsiders into the battle. They changed sides, and they helped the Sadducees defeat all the external powers. Think Alexander Janus was grateful? Not so much. He took 800 of the Pharisees inside of Jerusalem, crucified them. And that's nothing. As they're hanging there alive, waiting to die on the crosses, he brings their wives and children in front of them and has their throats slit.
Wow.
While he's having a party with all of his concubines.